Welcome to another BlackBerryCentral.com podcast. Today we're shooting episode 7 after a long delay. I'm joined by Scott, Josh, and Greg. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Should be a good podcast. We got a good list here.
Absolutely. It's been a couple of months now since we shot our last podcast. We do have a ton of topics to cover. If you haven't seen on the site, we do have the topics listed out today. But let's start off with clearing up some codename confusion. Right now we have a few devices that people are hearing about, and the names aren't exactly lining up. So a few months ago we talked about a device called the BlackBerry Oslo. It was in one of our rumor roundups. We talked about it going into testing in June. Shortly thereafter, we did post a rendering of what we were told was the BlackBerry Oslo, but have now learned that that's not the case. Internal coding and some other information's come forward saying that what we've been calling the Oslo is actually the Dallas. Now, that brings up the question, what is the Oslo? And that is what some other sites have codenamed Preg. It's an Android-based BlackBerry Leap-style entry model Android-based device. Now, people are going to obviously have those mixed opinions on that because it is Android and it's not BlackBerry 10. It's something that's going into carrier testing this month over the next 2 to 4 weeks, and hopefully a release within the next 2 months. Now, going back to Dallas here, it's something that a lot of people are kind of looking forward to. Initially, we thought, and we were told, okay, this is a European and Asian device, and then about an hour later we learned, okay, this thing is not actually geared for those regions. This is a North American device that could potentially see a worldwide release. And that's the case now, looking at FCC and seeing that this device has actually got North American bands set up for LTE. And then we also have the rumor that this thing is headed for T-Mobile. Greg is a T-Mobile guy, so I'd asked before, but I want to re-ask. If this device came to T-Mobile and it was the right circumstance for you, is it something you'd go and pick up?
You know, I haven't even had the chance to play with a Passport yet. Just here in North America, unless you buy from shopBlackberry.com, you're not typically walking into the carrier and picking up a Passport. Obviously, AT&T released a version. I haven't gotten to the store yet to see if they're out there. I know some people had trouble finding them in stores, and it's a different shape, and it looks like the Dallas might even be another design. So I'd be interested in seeing if A, it ends up in the retail store for once, and B, if I get my hands on it and play with it. I'm currently sitting on a Z30. I came from the Z10 before that, and the 9900 before that. So my devices are getting bigger and bigger, and my hands don't change size. They're not exactly monstrous. So it's getting more difficult for me to handle these devices. And so it's definitely something I'd go in if I could find it in the retail. I would pick it up and play with it and start focusing that direction because I have been interested in the Passport for sure.
Absolutely. And Josh, you've seen the leak.
You broke up there for a minute.
I've got some echo going on. You've seen the leaked images of this device, right?
Yes, I have.
And what's your opinion on it? Is it something you find appealing, or you lean the other way?
I don't know. I'm happy with the Passport I have, so I'm not too in tune to anything new at the moment, really. I like the way the Passport looks. I'm kind of stuck on that at the moment.
What about you, Scott? Any opinions?
I mean, it's interesting because are we going back to a time now where we're getting dealer or vendor-specific devices again, right? We see it with the AT&T Passport, the original Passport, now the AT&T Passport. Are you break open and call T-Mobile Passport for the Dallas? So are we going down that trend where we got various vendor-specific devices, specifically in the U.S.? That's the thing that's interesting. I got a normal Passport here. I'm not going to go and run and buy another device that walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and pretty well as the duck, aka the Passport. But I'm just interested to see, is that a strategy that BlackBerry's employing, or is that like a requirement that's being pushed on them with these various carriers to say, if you want your devices, we want our own branding.
Yeah.
That's the intriguing part to me.
Yeah. What do you think that does to consumers on a certain level? Because I know from my own standpoint, I like the original Passport design, but I've always envied that AT&T Passport design. And that, for me here in Waterloo, despite being in Waterloo, is actually a difficult model for me to get my hands on. So what do you do to consumers, someone who's on Verizon or AT&T and says, hey, you know what, that T-Mobile Passport device looks pretty fine. But do I want to have to switch carriers just to get it, or do I have to go out, buy it off contract, bring it over? Like, you cause a bit of a hassle, and is it worth it at that point, or should you just stick with maybe 1 to 2 variants of the device? Because now we see 3, and then we have color options. It gets confusing, and it's something we've touched on in a previous podcast.
Yep, for sure. It's all valid points. You know, it's basically segregation of the customers in the various carriers. So if you want an AT&T Passport, pretty well the only way you're going to get it is through AT&T. So you have to go there and either sign up with them or buy it, completely unlocked for $600-700, whatever it's going to sell for.
Yeah.
And the Dallas will be.
You can't buy it on BlackBerry, though, right? I mean, unless you were getting it off a Craigslist or something, there's no other way than to get it through the carrier, correct?
Yeah, you can't get the AT&T one off Shop BlackBerry. It's just the regular square passport. So that's what I mean by the segregation of the customers. You can only get it through the carrier. So that's interesting. Is this a new strategy that they're running with, or is this basically the now entrance fee for BlackBerry to get back into the U.S. market with the carriers?
I think you nailed it there, Scott. I think it's the U.S. market because we're still divided. We have Verizon, U.S. Cellular, and Sprint on this kind of network, and they're trying to get to LTE where it's all more GSM based, but they still have those old towers running the old CDMA networks. Then you have AT&T and T-Mobile on the GSM, but they definitely have some different bands going on. It's going to be interesting to see if the Dallas has band 12, because that's the one that's been missing from BlackBerry devices that T-Mobile runs. And it's only T-Mobile, so I can see why it's missing. But it'd be very beneficial for T-Mobile users on their carrier service to have band 12, and also Wi-Fi calling. They were a big proponent of Wi-Fi calling, but we haven't seen that for any BlackBerry devices since 10.2. I think 10.2. I think 10.2.1 killed it.
Yeah. God, I had a point there. Oh yeah, from a business perspective, on BlackBerry's end, they don't want this 50 million different variants. I'm sure of it. Like, it's much less costly to stick with one. Why do you think Apple actually took them so long to come up with 2 different variants of iPhone? Because they were making hand over fist. Well, they're still making hand over fist, but they were probably making hands over 2 fists when they just had one variant of the iPhone going. Would just be you able to pick the size of memory, and that was it. So the companies don't want to get into 50 million different variants because it costs them more per unit. And especially at BlackBerry, when the average sale price of a device is still only at $240, it's next to nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it important to you guys, do you think, or even the consumer base as a whole, not only on the enterprise side but on consumer base, to offer these different variants on Shop BlackBerry, like the AT&T rounded style, and make them more open so that way people in other countries are able to buy these devices rather than being stuck with one device that they might find another one more appealing to them? Is it important to have it on Shop BlackBerry?
I would think so. Customers want availability and they want options. So if the option is there, if I had the option when I bought my passport between the AT&T one and the regular passport, I would have probably had a hard time trying to decide because I kind of like both. There's aspects of both that I like. So the ability for a customer to go ahead and buy what they want is always what they want. But the issue again is I'm sure it's just a matter of conditions for sale within the carriers, and that's going to be what's the limiting factor, right?
Yeah.
Well, colors are always a big deal for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to tie colors to specific carriers, that's sort of a problem for a lot of people because people want the blue or they want the red or they want a silver or they want a white, and I don't think it's going to change that moving a white one only to, carrier X could be a possibility. I think that's just a marketing ploy, and it's something that's really hard to move away from. It's kind of how everybody does it, except for Apple, but they've got that niche that they've carved out, telling everybody what they can and can't do.
Well, the thing with Apple is that they know they're going to sell 1 million units a day, whereas BlackBerry's selling 1 million units a quarter. So they're pushing the product. With BlackBerry, I'd like to see them slow down on the colors because they're just not pushing enough. You know, it's just not enough units being sold. I know the Blue Classic just got released this past week, and reality is, like, really is how well is the Blue Classic going to sell? We just saw in the last quarter results that BlackBerry sold 1.1 million devices in a quarter. So we call a spade a spade. The Classic is not selling like we were expecting it to. So why even bother with another color variant? It's not like all of a sudden, like, people are going, a substantial amount of people are going to say, "Oh my God, the Classic's out in blue. I got to switch from iPhone or Android to go back to BlackBerry."
Yeah. It's almost weird too, in a certain sense, the way they're doing the color variations with the Classic, because we've had black for a while, and I enjoyed that color. But when white came out, I really wanted a white one. I don't know. I don't tend to get white devices, but there's something about the Classic and white to me that looks somewhat appealing. And now that got announced a while back. Now, in considering what day we're in right now, and then blue gets announced last week, like this Friday, and it goes, okay, it's available today. And I can go on right now, shop BlackBerry Canada, and I can order a blue one, but I can't order a white one. And to me, that's frustrating because the white one got announced a while ago, and that's the one I want. I don't care for a blue one. I want the white one. And it's just the way they're doing things can often be extremely confusing. I don't know if you guys feel the same way at all about that.
Well, I like to get my devices right away, so when I'm stuck with the black automatically because I'm not waiting for a color. It would be nice if the colors came out at launch day. Here, you get 3 colors. You know, black and white and whatever the color theme of the year that people seem to like. For a while it was red. You know, maybe it'll be blue. Maybe it'll be silver or some chromey looking thing or something, you know. But it'd be nice if they were all launched at the same time, you know, because I'm not buying another Passport just because it's a color. The same with the rounded corners. Yeah, absolutely, I would have been torn between the square corner and rounded corner one, you know. But I want them all offered up front right at the beginning. You know, maybe I'd buy 2 at the beginning, but I'm not going to buy a second one now because now I'm waiting for whatever this slider thing might be. You know, that's what my next device is going to be, is the next set of hardware that's changed, not just the color.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, it's more than just consumers, and this is a problem across the line, which is still hindering BlackBerry, is the more they mess this up, it affects also the other vendors out there that are building accessories for the devices, your cases, your clips, your charging stands, yada, yada, yada. The stuff that consumers want to be able to go out on eBay or Amazon or wherever and buy. And if they don't, you know, launch with a device, or they continue to make changes to the devices, aka or i.e. You know, Passport versus AT&T Passport, things start becoming incompatible, and those accessory vendors just won't build this stuff for them anymore, which then turns away the consumers because, well, I can get the device, but I can't get the screensaver or screen protector and the case I want for it, so I'm going to go and get an iPhone because there's 50 million vendors out there for it.
Yeah. The early adopters get screwed over in that sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. You get something, you're like, okay, this is great, and then a month later they go, hey, look at this, it's even better. But you can't have it. It screws you up a bit. Moving forward to our next topic, let's talk about the BlackBerry Oslo. So to clear that up, not the Dallas, the Oslo. Now, to go over it, this is the Leap/Z30 based device that's supposed to be running Android and is currently in carrier testing. There was a publication, I can't remember if it was by Mobile Syrup or Phone Dog, but it was about 4 ways that BlackBerry could be unique on Android. And that's the hub, BBM, BES, and the keyboard. Now those 4 points, in itself, just those 4 are actually great points. Keyboard, for one, is a great thing. On Android, there's so much customization you can do when it comes to getting different keyboards. Google has them, Swift has theirs. There's a bunch of different app vendors that do their own keyboard things. So if BlackBerry were to step in there and I could get that really great virtual keyboard that I have on my Leap, and I could put it on an Android device and use it there, then that way that it becomes more streamlined. That way you get the hub on there. Is there an advantage to putting all these features available to an Android device? If I could download all that on my Galaxy Note, and the benefit to me would then be the obviously the Google Play features, the Android apps at that point. It's not so much the OS as it is the offerings when it comes to Google. Is there a point in offering all that, or taking BlackBerry 10 and finding a way to integrate Google services better? Like, what do you guys think about that? Like, it's really mixed. Greg, what do you think?
Hey man, it's almost going to segmentize the BlackBerry users to me. Like, there's some that are going to say, no, I have BlackBerry because of not only BlackBerry 10, the security provides the QNX operating system, all these things that a hardcore BlackBerry user wants out of their BlackBerry. I'm not going to go to an Android version just to, because I've already got Hub, and I've already got BBM, and I've already got X, Y, and Z on my BlackBerry. So why would I go to an Android version? Then there's people who say, yeah, I need those apps. I'm missing out on whatever. So I want that Google Play services, and I'm willing to give up whatever you may be giving up, going from QNX to Android operating system. I think one of the biggest questions is, how is Android going to run on the BlackBerry? Is QNX going to be underneath? And, we certainly don't know that. Or is it going to be a pure Android, almost like a Nexus type device? We don't know that. We've seen Blend run on Android. Seems to do pretty well. We've seen some hub-style integration on Android devices. I mean, they're definitely seeming to lean that way. Would I make the jump? I really have to see how it plays out. I kind of really like the security that comes with having an absolute vertical BlackBerry device, where I'm from hardware to software to BES all the way up.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, and I think when we compare a device at entry-level markets, if we go for something that has a core BlackBerry 10 function, and we go with something that's completely Android-based, and we look at that market share, and we can see the difference between what thrives and what doesn't. Because we had the launch of the Z3, we had the launch of the Q5, and then we have the Leap. All three supposed to be entry-level models, and we've seen how they've done. And we see this decrease in sales. And the Leap's done a little bit better than the Z3, but overall, you can't expect a large saturation of the market when you run a device OS that isn't capable of running the applications that are extremely popular in these countries. So, Scott, if I were to take, say you work at BlackBerry, you're one of the head guys, and you say we can either launch the Leap in Indonesia or we can launch an Android-based device in Indonesia. What do you think would do better?
Oof. I'd have to say Android would.
Yeah.
Android's just the most popular, as a whole, most popular OS out there in the world. So, someone like, ooh, best of both worlds, maybe. BlackBerry, some BlackBerry stuff, and then apps with Android. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what the company's going for. Maybe they're going to launch both, keep both around, do a BlackBerry Android and BlackBerry 10 still. BlackBerry Android with for the customers, and then BB10 for the prosumers / corporate. Who knows right now at this point, because nothing's been released. But yeah, if I was a regular customer in Indonesia, I'm sure I would go with the Android version, most likely. Mm-hmm. If I'm the average, I'm thinking like the average person, not like Scott McCarthy right now.
Yeah. And then the way that Greg put it, having the BlackBerries that are supposed to be running Android and thinking of it as the Nexus style thing, where Google says to a vendor, you can create this year's Nexus device, and essentially it's your hardware, our software, and it's that base core software. And if we look at the leaked stuff we've seen of the Venice, not to jump onto that topic so soon, but if we just look at that in itself, that's core Android that's on that device. That's not a masked OS. That's not a themed OS. That is core basic lollipop right there, and that's exactly what you'd get if we released a Nexus style device. It's LG hardware running Google software.
That's what if I think about BlackBerry developing and pushing out an Android device, that's what we would get because the company is not about all kinds of flash and bling or whatever that all these different layers that are being put on top of Android. It would be basically, okay, here's your keyboard, here's your hub, and here's a couple other features, and done. And that would be it. That's what I would expect from them anyway. So it might actually be a good experience for some people. We'll have to wait and see.
Josh, what do you think? Is it something in your own belief? Do you think it's a good idea to do an Android device based on BlackBerry hardware?
I'm not sure. I like it. No.
No. What about in an emerging markets sort of scenario?
I don't really see how it gains anything. There's so many Android devices out there. Like, why is somebody going to put the BlackBerry name when they see it, on a display, and put Android together? I think it's confusing.
Yeah.
I don't think people are going to understand it, and I don't think you're going to see numbers of people buying them. I don't.
Yeah. It's a good point. We still even with BlackBerry 10, I find there's still some confusion on a consumer level where people say, I don't want a BlackBerry because I used to have, a Curve or a Bold back in the day because so many people had them. But battery pulls and the software issues, it's a good device, the keyboard's great, but I don't want to have to deal with the software stuff. And people might, you mix that with BlackBerry 10, and then you go from BlackBerry 10, you throw Android in the mix. And where does the consumer come in on an understanding level and saying, okay, this is what I get when I buy a BlackBerry device? And what's the difference? It's almost like what you said, confusing. So what are the core advantages to releasing Android and throwing that within the mix of branding confusion that BlackBerry still has to go through?
I don't see
To me,
how.
it's a consumer
Go ahead.
grab. You're looking at grabbing those people who think that they need, the Google Play services and all this kind of stuff. I don't use Google Maps a whole lot when I'm traveling. I use BlackBerry Maps. It's fantastic. Most people aren't going to be able to chance to use it because it's not on Android, it's not on iOS. I have terrible sense of direction. When I'm out of town and I'm using BlackBerry Maps, I have never gotten lost. I don't know. I just don't see what I'm missing from that standpoint, but I think it's a consumer grab to get those people who, like you said, think of BlackBerry in an older style, but really appreciated the hardware, so they'll go, oh, it's BlackBerry hardware, and I've got Android software. But has BlackBerry's been so enterprise-focused lately that I don't know is it time to go for a consumer grab, or will it be too late later?
Yeah. If we move forward, still speaking on OS as we talk about the current OS that's supposed to be rolling out, a lot of people still not seeing it. Some have gotten it. 10.3.2 in about a week ago, almost 2 now. I'm not too sure on the timeline there, but 10.3.2.2226 was seeded to beta testers, if I'm not mistaken there. And then the rumor came up, is this the last 10.3.2 build that they're going to be seeding to testers? Now, if you follow along with our rumor roundups, this past Tuesday we did talk about that rumor, and that was, I believe it was Monday of last week. They seeded that to the beta zone members in that 10.3 beta program, and rumors quickly came about that being the last iteration of the OS to those testers, and that's because if you just look at the OS the way it currently is right now, being a 2.2.2.6 build, that's at that point where that's release grade. What's the real focus if you continue to do 10.3.2.3562 kind of thing? It almost doesn't make sense after a while. And from what we have an understanding of is that internally, yeah, that's the last 10.3.2 build for those beta testers. And of course, when they did announce 10.3.2 rolling out, they touched on 10.3.3. So the question then comes up, is that what's going to be seeded to the testers in the coming months? Because there is gaps when you do see those OSs, and we've seen that within the program where they're seeded a few things, and then it kind of stops for a bit until they have that next thing ready for them. So by seeding this last one, are they saying they're ready to begin the 10.3.3? And then that's confusing too when we talk about OSs. What do you guys think about 10.3.3, like, say we're at that last 10.3.2 build, and they start talking about 10.3.3. What do you think? What's the first initial thought, Scott, when you hear 10.3.3?
Two things. One, give me some features, some new features, because 10.3.2 has just been a bust, just the background. But we knew that was going to happen anyway. But let's hope it links to a device launch as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because usually when we do a massive update, 10.3 with the Passport, 3.1 with the Classic, 3.2 has had nothing launched with it, so hopefully 10.3.3 will have something with it, and hopefully it'll lead to slider in a BlackBerry 10. But you never know, right? So watch and shoot, as we say in the Canadian Army, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. When we had 10.3.1 announced, we saw that seeded to beta testers. Initially, to get that compatibility rolling with the older devices, the Q10, the Z10, making sure that it was set up for those devices. And of course, the Classic had that hardware. But when 10.3.1 came out, we knew what that was for. We knew, okay, we're on 10.3 now with the Passport. Everyone else is on 10.2. We need to make that jump. But of course, when we do that, we're announcing new hardware with that. And 10.3.1 brought the Classic when it launched. And of course, we saw hints throughout OSs when it came to 10.3.1. It brought in that new hardware optimization, and that's generally what those 0.1s or 0.3s are for, is that new hardware that comes in. Based on the timeline, because what we talked about on BlackBerry Central is seeing the Venice within a September to October timeframe with a November release, just in time for Christmas. If we do see that device come around mid-September, beginning of October, and we think how long it takes to get that OS set up. My base and personal opinion on that is if we don't see 10.3.3 out to those testers within the next, July? Within the next month, then my opinion would be that 10.3.2 is the stop for the current hardware with the current chipsets that we see in the Z10, Z30, Q10, Q5, all those devices. We could see 10.3.2 be that last iteration, and 10.3.3 be the octa-core optimization, the new hardware optimization for that device. Do you think 10.3.2 is a good OS to just drop off on and then leave the current in-market devices on, and given their age?
I think so. Like, I personally think 10.3.1 was pretty solid all around. Like, there was a few minor bugs and stuff like that, but I enjoyed 10.3.1 right from day one. And I think we have to accept that the bullet will have to hit the Z10, the Q10, Q5, the Z30 sooner than later, and that these are going to be end of life. And I'm actually kind of surprised that the Z10 is still kicking and still getting the support, but it's a good thing to see as well. Yeah. So maybe it actually points out that the hardware wasn't used fully up until now, right? If it's still able from day one of BlackBerry 10.001 something, whatever it was released on, that now they're still going at 10.3.1 or 10.3.2, sorry, it actually points that there's some solid hardware in there for it to be rolling. But yeah, everybody has to assume that they're gonna go eventually. They're going to get end of life, and 10.3.3 might be a good time, depending on what's coming down the pipe, which we just don't know, or the rumors are stating. Could it be this octa-core slider that's going to be the spec killer of everything out there? And we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah. Any opinions, Josh or Greg?
I'm not sure about end of life of my Passport.
Yeah. Not the Passport. That would be.
I don't want to see that kind of die. So, I would think there must be some more work that can be done on the OS as it is now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe another year or so.
You keep in mind that the Passport's has got the RAM backing that the other devices don't have. So, where the slaughter comes out, if it's going to be the octa-core device, the Passport's going to have the RAM to back it up to keep it up up to speed for a while yet. Vice the Z10, Z30s don't have. So I think that's been the key difference there.
If you're looking at a big jump there, going from what are we, dual core on the Z30 and Passport to octa-core, I mean, that's a big jump, and you're going from 3.2 to 10.3.3. Doesn't seem like a big jump. Seems like maintenance release type OS, and I'm wondering if if you're doing something that big, and if rumors has the Samsung processor in the slider, are they doing that also be running a BlackBerry version, or if we do have two variants, are they going to have different processors to run these different things? And when do you get to BlackBerry 11? How big a change are we talking, and that kind of stuff.
Before we get into the Venice, I wanted to touch on some of the faces of BlackBerry kind of dropping off. We've seen Heidi leave, we've seen the head of India leave, we've seen Nick leave, and then Donnie the other day, which a lot of people felt very close to in a lot of ways. These are the people who for a long time have been a face of the company. If we also talk about the name is escaping me right now, and I don't know why. But we have these faces leaving the company. People are so familiar with these people, like Heidi, for example, and Donnie, people who make the videos, people who are up there doing presentations. They leave the company, and I think a lot of people, and somewhat myself included, are questioning, is that a personal choice where they say, you know what, I know internally the direction that this company is starting to go in, and it's not one that I started with, and it's not those foundations that I believe in, and then maybe it's time for me to move on to something different, or they're at that seniority point where it's like, you know what, I've been here 12 years, maybe it's time I try to look at something new. But it's interesting. Over the past few months, we have seen a lot of good people leave the company. Do you guys have any opinions? Anyone you saw leave that you're kind of going, well, I wish they didn't. I wish they stuck with it because they're really good at what they do?
Well, I'm always interested in who the replacements are. So to me, that would answer some of the questions that you had. If somebody's replaced that's from the Android world, just to throw that out there, or something similar to that can kind of tell you what a direction on a team might be going inside BlackBerry. So that's where I always try to find out that information. As soon as someone says they're leaving, I look at who's being replaced, who's being brought in to replace them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've definitely seen a lot of Sybase type, people who John Chin may or may not have been affiliated with during those times coming into BlackBerry. Of course, we saw Alex Saunders, Alex Kinsella, Tim Neal, some of those older who were there right at the launch of BlackBerry 10 have trickled off over the last year or so. And it does feel like they're kind of bringing in some people who may be more familiar with John Chin and his direction and some of his visions that he's had for the company.
Yeah. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Sunil, which is the one who was the India head, I believe he left, but he did work at Sybase for a bit. So it's I don't know, it's really strange. And what do you think, Scott? What's your opinion overall?
I come from a work culture where I don't hold a job longer than a year or two. I stay in one spot for 4 years at the most. So change is a constant for us in personnel. And I think maybe it's nothing at all, really. It could be just a simple fact that these guys are getting offers to move on in their careers, and that's what they're taking advantage of because, let's call it a spade and say BlackBerry hasn't sunk, so there's obviously a lot of good people in there working hard and doing some good work despite everything that's against them. And maybe they are getting offers, or maybe they're saying, you know what, I've been really working hard for the past 5 years, 6 years. It's time for me to take a break and slow down. Or I know one person personally, and his family situation changed, and he needed something where he was going to make some more money, and that's the only reason why he left the company. So we'll never know the true story. I'm a little bit less speculative than most in that, oh my God, these people are leaving the company. It must be internal turmoil or the company directions going wrong. You know what? Maybe it's just time for them to move on. Personally, you know, and let's not make a bigger deal of it. I'm kind of in line with Josh and making sure the right people come in behind them.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll see how it goes, but let's not look into it too much. If it was mass exodus, like you know, we saw 5 C-level people leaving and stuff like that, I'd question it more. But a couple, reality is junior to mid-level people leaving the company. That's nothing unheard of, personally.
So yeah, I don't know. Heidi was obviously one of the higher ones, being in that sort of vice presidency in that region of it. And I know when Gadway left, to me that was more personal. Having heard and seen things of him at the events, after the events, just being so incredibly drained and exhausted, and not always in the time for conversation when it comes to him. Maybe they just get exhausted too. But a good thing is to look forward to who gets replaced, and then what we see that way.
Yeah.
Hopefully we see people who are very dedicated and hardworking. Like we saw some people who, like, if we look back at the co-founders, or the main co-founders to CEOs, those guys, when you look at them and their dedication in the initial, but then we see them sink off, and you look at them and you say, you know what, they've worked there a long time. But then we look at Chen coming in after Heinz and saying, wow, this is someone who's new. We aren't familiar with them. We can read their history, but to see them in that leadership role and changing things, it's a good thing. And it's done very well for BlackBerry in terms of profits and upscaling the company. So who knows? I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on it, and hopefully we see some good replacements.
I mean, the other thing to look at is some of the guys that have come in the security part in that department. There's some pretty high-profile people, some pretty successful people have been brought in. So there may be people that we're disappointed that we see leave, but if we look at some of these people that just came in from the security aspect, some big guns came in. So there's something moving over there in the security department at BlackBerry. There's a game going on over there, and it's full force. So that's a positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we go to Venice conversation, because that is a big topic these days. We've touched on it here and there throughout this podcast. We've talked about it for months now. It's the next big flagship from BlackBerry, and there's so much confusion, and I know a lot of us here are still confused about what's going on, despite knowing a few things. So if we look at the specs leak, if you guys recall, some specs leaked out, talking 808 processor, we're talking, no battery spec was leaked, but I believe it was a 16 megapixel camera.
Yeah.
We're talking like high-end compatible Android flagship specs. Like this is like, we can't even compare it to an iPhone because they've been using like no RAM for like 5 years now. But if we look at where BlackBerry's kind of going with Android and we compare it to those kind of specs, so we look at devices like the new HTC One, we look at the new S6, the S6 Edge, those devices, based on what we've seen leaked, this thing looks like it can be incredibly competitive in terms of specs. So we saw those specs leak, and then of course we see EV leaks, which has been an incredibly long-term leaker of Android handsets, things that are unrelated to Android. We go into other hardware, and then we've seen some BlackBerry leaks in the very distant past. Now seeing a BlackBerry rendering leak of this upcoming device, and we also saw him tweet about it's the BlackBerry Venice that is Android powered, headed for AT&T. Seeing that tweet, what do you guys think? If someone who has a pretty good track record of leaking things, saying, okay, the BlackBerry Venice is Android powered and it's headed to AT&T, what's your first opinion on that, Josh?
I kind of discount the rumors like that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel right so early on. There's nothing really to back it up. You know, sure, he has a history, but there's multiple devices that are being tested that are out in the wild with people using them. So somebody could see device A and think that's the one, and then somebody else says, well, no, I saw this device B over here, and this is the one. So they're both reasonable people, and they've seen them, and they have a history of being right on things. So it still doesn't hold a lot of weight to me. I need something more, something a little bit more tangible.
Yeah. You want to see like a device in the flesh kind of thing?
Well, yes, a little bit better video of somebody using one, maybe. But I think in the past, wasn't there a leak on the Passport keyboard early on before people knew what the Passport was going to be?
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a really early leak, if I remember right. And it was hard to deny that specific device the person was using was real, because it was, outside of a store on the street corner somewhere, like somebody was using it. It wasn't a computer version of a render or something. So until I see more, I'm just going to sit back and wait and see.
Yeah. What about you, Scott? What do you think?
Well, I'm just going to bring us back to Mobile World Congress there, where John Chen announced those productivity suites, right? Those different packages, and he stated that they will work on Android, iOS, Windows Phone. So could it have been maybe he saw someone working an Android device, a BlackBerry Android device, and the fact is he's one of these testers for these suites. And why not use a device that you have in development plus Android software plus the productivity suite to do it and hit everything at once? Might be a long shot, might not be, but let's not forget about that, because if John Chen said he's got these suites that are going to be developed and ready to roll in the near future, obviously they're going to be testing that as well. So that's where I'm still sitting, maybe, or maybe they do have the Venice as the flagship BlackBerry Android device. We won't know until it's officially announced, of course. But that's still in the back of my mind, those suites and how BlackBerry would test them. And if I think about it, it would be on my own hardware plus a ripped up version of Android with the suite on it.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Now if I pull up, I'm just going to pull up that leak picture, or leak rendering, all of that.
It was the keyboard, the hub, the camera was there.
Can we see the rendering on my screen or no?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we talk about this is what was tweeted out. And just because we're talking about the suites there, obviously a few things we could point out is, okay, we see the Play Store up here, we see Hangouts. We obviously know this is a core Android device. We can tell by this as well.
Yeah.
Do you see anything about Hub or messages or anything BlackBerry related aside from the branding at the very top here?
Nothing.
Nothing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a render.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Yeah.
So someone just rendered that. That's not an actual picture. So until we see something physical, something real, I'm sure, Dylan, you're pretty swabby at that at Photoshop. Sorry, you could do that on a Passport or even a Leap, right?
It's not difficult, and I mean there's a lot of confusing things from my perspective, because we know that this connection thing right here, where it's got this kind of gap and it goes over this whole unit. I mean, things can change between a beta device and a production unit. Chances are we aren't going to see a bezel that's this thin touch down across the bottom of the speaker grill, and just the way it's rendered to me seems like it could have been something easily faked just for the mere attention of it. Just like we saw him tweet out a picture of a Passport running some Android software, and it was just awful in terms of how it was done, and not official, not even really internal at that point. So it's interesting to see where he's getting this from. Screen-wise, it's done well, but at the bottom here, there's just a lot of things a lot of people could question and should question. So we'll see how things turn out. But overall, looking at it, if we were to say this is, for whatever reason, this is a carrier rendering that AT&T had, why is there no BlackBerry stuff on here? Why don't we see the hub on here if this is, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to launch an Android device and not put those productivity suite options on the device.
BBM isn't even there, for God's sake.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, looking at it, I'd say no. This isn't something to go based on or to look at and say this is real, this is legitimate. But it does lead the imagination to question a lot of things. So we've had that leak, we've seen the tweets leak, we've seen the specs, and we look at 10.3.3. Do you guys think offering an Android-based option as well as a BlackBerry 10 option is a smart move? Say on a production level, I can say to AT&T, okay, we'll provide you, this device, but we're going to put an Android core to it. But then on Shop BlackBerry, for my prosumers, I could say, you know what, here's a 10.3.3 based device. It's 110% BlackBerry 10. And if you're looking for that Android option, you can look to your carriers. Is that a good option? What do you guys think is a good idea when it comes to this device?
Honestly, on a business side, as you're talking about this, if you have Android on it, and if I recall, licensing Android is free, right? For the hardware makers, LG, Asus, whoever, they license that for free.
I'm not entirely familiar with that. I don't know if anyone else might be.
But if you sell a Android running BlackBerry, and then you have a prosumer enterprise, and you consider it a premium project because it's running BlackBerry 10, because it has QNX, because of all these things, and it's an extra $50, you have discounted Android. And that covers not just the BlackBerry Android, the LGs, the Sammys, everything else. And you're saying, my product is okay. You can buy the Android, that's fine. It's down here if that's what you want. If you really want something special, here's the BlackBerry 10 version.
What about you, Josh? Do you think we should offer two variants when it comes to this device?
That just get everybody more confused again?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I can't afford two devices, so I just want one device.
Yeah. And what do you do if you're the big honcho at BlackBerry and you say, I can go either one direction or the other? Either way, you're going to piss people off. Because I say they throw out a full Android Venice device. There's so many core BlackBerry users who are going, I want BlackBerry, I don't want Android. I'm buying a BlackBerry for a BlackBerry. So, yeah, it does. Confusion is the biggest word to use on BlackBerry right now because nothing really makes sense. Devices, software, timeline, roadmap, it's all confusing, and yeah. Scott, any?
Well, I'll point out a couple things. First off, BlackBerry wouldn't be the first manufacturer to run two OSs with devices. There's a load of them out there running Windows Phone. So let's make that point out. They're not going to be paving the way or cutting new trees down, new paths, because they're the first ones to do that. I would be interested to see, let's theorize this. Let's say BlackBerry goes ahead and makes an Android OS. They're not going to go ahead and make two. I don't think they would make two completely different devices. Chips, yeah. So let's say you go ahead and you buy a BlackBerry device and you boot it for the first time, and the first screen you see is, which operating system would you like? Now, wouldn't that be interesting? Right from home, you can either download BlackBerry 10 or you can go ahead and download BlackBerry Android.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an interesting thought. And if they went that route, if you could do that. If I could go ahead and have my passport and load BlackBerry Android onto it to try it out and decide whether or not it's for me, and go back to BlackBerry 10, I think it would be, if they're going to do that, that's the way they need to do it. Not have passport and Dallas or whatever you want to call it that's pure Android, but my passport, which I can run BlackBerry 10 or BlackBerry Android on it at my desire. That's how they need to, if they're going to do it, that's how they need to do it.
So do you mean you'd have to wipe the device and reload the other operating system every time you change? Or you can change on the fly? Yeah,
that's my initial thought would be, a complete wipe. But keep in mind, hypervisor right there says I can run two OSs. So
some have even speculated that we could see something like workspace, like the workspace function, where I could swipe down from the top of my device and go, okay, switch to Android, and then hypervisor would constantly keeping those cores running. And if we have a device that has 8 cores to it, it wouldn't skip a beat when it comes down to it. When we talk about hypervisor and integrating the QNX into 8 cores like that. That just becomes incredible. And if they could manipulate it to switch like that, is that an advantage? Is that confusing? Is that a downfall? Does that ruin the device? Does it make it more advantageous over multiple different devices? There's so many questions.
Yeah, you won't answer those until the devices get released, the operating system gets released, if they do get released, and especially the core users get out there and try it out to see if it's actually worth their while or not.
Yeah.
But,
chances are we're going to see a 10.3.3 build out before we see this Venice device. And myself, and I know a ton of other people, we've got the Rask, a bunch of other guys, that as soon as an OS comes out, they go digging right through it. So as soon as one of those builds come out, I'm sure we're going to be able to figure out, is this something we're going to see on the Venice, or is this for some other device? So, but a lot of big questions. I'd like to wrap up today's podcast. Definitely want to ask our viewers, starting with the Dallas, is that something you guys are looking forward to? Should the Venice have a dual booting option? Should we offer Android, or should we stick with BlackBerry 10? Drop us a comment on our BBM channel, on our website, or shoot us a tweet at the BB Central. Big thanks to Scott, Josh, and Greg for joining me today. Always fun. Great to see that we finally accomplished podcast number 7, and hopefully we will see everyone in 2 weeks.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep.